The first year after Adrienne died, I faked my way through it. I really did. I felt this ridiculous obligation to make sure other people knew I was okay, and I was not okay at all.
I am Gloria Grace Rand, founder of The Love Method and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Live, Love, Engage: How to Stop Doubting Yourself and Start Being Yourself. In this podcast, we share practical advice from a spiritual perspective on how to live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically, so you can create a life and business with more impact, influence, and income. Welcome to Live, Love, Engage. Namaste. What if the deepest pain of your life became your greatest source of healing? Join us today to learn how one woman's 147-day journey through loss revolutionized her approach to grief and could transform yours too. But before I bring her on, I want to welcome those of you who may be new to Live, Love, Engage. I am Gloria Grace, and I help female entrepreneurs attract clients who align with your values and become your biggest cheerleaders. And joining us today is a woman that I have known for a couple of years. I was actually fortunate enough to be on her podcast a few years ago. Her name is Andrea Wilson Woods, and she is a keynote speaker, a writer who loves to tell stories, and a patient advocate who founded the nonprofit Blue Faery, the Adrienne Wilson Liver Cancer Association. And her best-selling and award-winning book, Better Off Bald: A Life in 147 Days, is a medical memoir about raising and losing her sister to liver cancer. So without further ado, I'm going to bring her up onto the stage and welcome you, Andrea, to Live, Love, Engage.
Thank you so much, Gloria, now Grace. I've been looking forward to this because, like you said, we know each other. So this is awesome.
Yes. It's always nice to be able to have a chat with someone that you've chatted before with previously.
Yeah.
I don't think my English was very good there, but whatever. I feel like my preposition was in the wrong place, but whatever. Anyway, so we do have something in common in that the fact that we have both lost a sister to cancer, but the similarities in our stories really end there. So I would appreciate if you could share with our audience a little bit today, a little bit about your sister and your journey, and how it's kind of led you to where you are today and the work you're doing.
Yes, so we do have that in common, and the major difference is I ended up raising my sister. So my sister and I have the same mother, but different fathers. Her father actually died before she was born, so she never knew him, unfortunately. And there was a 14-year age gap between us. And when my sister was 8 years old, she came to visit me in Los Angeles for what was supposed to be a 2-week Christmas vacation. And the day after Christmas, our mother called and said she didn't want to be a mother anymore. And I did not put this together at the time. It took me years to actually make this connection, but that was 3 days before my mother's 50th birthday. And so I don't know if it was a combination of a midlife crisis, but she also was a drug addict, and she had lost her nursing license for shooting up morphine at work. And so I had watched her life just fall apart that previous year. And I had even been sending my mom money. And so when she said that the day after Christmas, I just told her, I said, well, if I take her now, I'm not giving her back because I saw the destruction of my sister's childhood. And so I ended up taking physical custody that December of 1994. And then eventually I went to court and won full legal custody of my sister.
Wow. Yeah. And like I said, we do have other things in common too, because I had, there was a 14-year difference between me and my brother. So I was the baby of the family. It sounds like your sister was as well. So yeah, it's interesting how things like that happen. So Yeah, so what happened? I mean, how did it wind up that she, was diagnosed with cancer, and what happened with there?
Yeah, so I raised Adrienne all through my 20s,
Mm,
and she did have a very difficult time in middle school. She had a very serious bout of depression, and I sort of accidentally, when cleaning her room, found out how suicidal she really was, and so got her into therapy right away. And we were very fortunate that we just got the best therapist for my sister on the planet. So shout out to Denise, whose name I changed in the book, but I can say her name now. And we were so fortunate. And so we really thought we got through that, and she started high school. She was really just embracing who she was, and she stopped trying to fit in and be like others. And she had a great boyfriend, a lot of friends, honor student. And so here she is. She's about to finish her freshman year of high school at Burbank High in Southern California. And I came home from work, and I was actually a teacher. And usually, when I walked in the door, she would be at the kitchen table doing her homework because that was a rule in our house. She had to do her homework first. But instead, on that day, on May 16th, 2001, I walked in and she was on the living room floor, curled up in a fetal position, saying she couldn't breathe. Now, mind you, the day before she was fine.
mm,
And so we went to her pediatrician. He didn't like what he saw. He sent us to the local hospital to get a CAT scan. So we go through the emergency room. And it was actually an ER doctor who told us that Adrienne had tumors in her liver and lungs. And
mm,
that hospital in Burbank, it's for adults, it's not for pediatric patients. So that night, she was transferred to Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And
mm,
that was one of many, many rides in an ambulance. Um, and that was day one of her 147-day cancer journey.
mm,
um, I think one of the few blessings we had was that because she was so young, they moved very fast because they could
mm,
not believe what they were seeing on that CAT scan. She had a biopsy within 2 days
mm,
that confirmed that she had stage 4 hepatocellular carcinoma, which is the most common type of primary liver cancer, also known as HCC, and that had metastasized to her lungs.
mm,
And it was just shocking. I mean, she was doing her first round of chemotherapy a week later.
mm. Yeah, it's crazy how those things can come up so fast, and 'cause it was similar with my sister. No symptoms, and then all of a sudden pain. And
Yeah.
it's like, from the size of it when it was finally diagnosed. I mean, it wasn't not a small tumor, and so it had been growing for a long time. But it's weird how those things happen. I in looking at the website that you started, the nonprofit, I saw that she was keeping a journal, which again, it's similar. My sister did that as well. She started to kind of document her experience through that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was that something she decided to do on her own, or did somebody else encourage her?
She was always a writer. I mean, she started
Mm,
keeping paper journals when she was 10 years old, and it's kind of funny, and I still have them, and those are like little paper journals that locked, but not really. So she always loved to write, and she was a voracious reader as well. And she started keeping a journal online before she was diagnosed. And I was not allowed to read it, but other people were. I had spies that read it to make sure, because I was still worried about the depression. But so she started a journal online before she was diagnosed and decided to continue writing in it throughout. And so she wrote in that journal up until about 3 weeks before she died was the last entry in that journal. So
mm,
she was an amazing writer.
mm. Now, did you include any of that in your book then that you wrote, or?
Yes, so I did not read her journal in its
Okay,
entirety until about a year and a half after she died.
sure.
And I kept a medical diary when she was diagnosed. And when I decided that the structure of my book would be like a journal,
Mhm,
I decided to include excerpts from her journal beginning on day 3. And
mm,
so the chapters open with an excerpt from Adrienne's journal. So you really get to see her point of view as a patient and my point of view as her parent and caregiver.
mm,
And you also see this great divide, this great moment where I thought she was getting better after her 4th round of chemo because it had gone so well. Like everything had been perfect. We had no problems whatsoever. It was shocking. It was amazing.
mm,
And she deep down, she knew, and she wrote at the same time she knew she was getting worse. She knew she was dying.
Wow.
And she
Hmm.
protected me from that.
Hmm.
And for that, I'm very, very grateful. And because I could not have handled that if I just couldn't have.
Hmm.
And so that's why I wrote the book the way I did. And in fact, in March of this year, we published Adrienne's journal along with her artwork and poetry. And that book is titled I'd Rather Be Dead Than Deaf, A Young Woman's Journey with Liver Cancer. And all the proceeds of that book actually go to the nonprofit Blue Faery.
Oh, I love that. Uh, you're in number one. I'm going to have to go buy this book and read it because I've started and stopped doing something similar for my sister about probably 3 times now in the
I
how
remember
many
talking about
years.
you writing a
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
I do.
And I can't seem to get myself to quite finish it. So I'm curious. I want to talk to you a little bit about, about your personal then journey. Your experience, and then as a caregiver, and then grieving, and how you were able to then even put together a book. So
Oh gosh.
start wherever you want on
Oh
that.
god, I was gonna say, where do you
Yeah.
want me to start?
Well, let's see. How about we start with the book first? Why don't we start with the book first, and we'll work our way back, maybe. That
Okay,
might be
that sounds
easier.
good. I like that. Well, I always knew I wanted to write a book about me and my sister. And I started writing like little thoughts down and things like that because we had such a special relationship. I mean, she was my child and she was my sister, and I always told her, one day when you grow up, I hope I'm your best friend or good friend. And so we just had this incredible bond, and I loved her and still love her unconditionally. And I've never felt that way about anybody. And I feel like parents should love their children unconditionally, but that was not what I received from my parents, and I don't think most people receive that from their parents. And she knew how much I loved her. And in fact, her last words were, "I love you, sissy." And so about a year and a half after she died, I realized that I was going to be writing a very different story. And there were lots of starts and stops. I mean, I did a lot of research up front. One of the things I did, and I highly recommend if you write nonfiction, is I knew I wasn't ready to write the book, but I wanted to make sure people's memories were fresh. So within a year of my sister's death, I asked anyone who was involved in that journey if they would let me interview them. And I did that. I interviewed almost everyone. And so that's why I know other people's perspectives and even other conversations, because people allowed me to interview them for the book. But it was 4 or 5 years after she died when I started writing the very first draft. And it took 2 years to write that first draft.
Yeah. I can imagine that. So let's dive in a little bit more though, because I know in just even my book that I wrote wasn't about my sister, but I included some of her stories in it, and I
Yeah.
know that at one point I felt like she was actually helping me write it, because I suddenly had an urge to like look back at what she was writing about while she was going through her journey, and I was like, oh wow, okay, yeah, I can relate. So, how was that experience for you? I mean, really,
Yeah.
was it
I
cathartic? Was it painful? How
It
was
was
it?
not cathartic. I swear,
Okay.
whenever people say writing's cathartic, I'm like, what do you write? It's like, wait, what is it that you write? Because it was not cathartic to me. For me, I wrote the first draft in her bedroom where she died.
Mhm.
And so I very much felt her with me. But for me, it wasn't cathartic because it was like having this, you know, horrible wound. Like imagine this deep, deep cut, and every time it would start to heal, I'm ripping off the band-aid again, because the way I wrote that first draft was, I even before I really was good at meditating, I would put myself back there in the moment. I had my medical diary, I had her journals, I had this incredible outline, and so I could go right back to that moment. And and doing that was incredibly painful. I mean, once I got that first draft out, after all the rewrites weren't nearly as hard. They were time consuming, but they weren't as emotionally difficult as that first draft was.
Mm. Yeah. And well, you mentioned meditation. I'm gonna go there. So, because I know
Okay.
that's something that helped me. So, and we did say when I was promoting this episode that I wanted to get into healing. So is
Yeah.
that something that you relied on, to help you through? Uh,
I mean, no, I didn't for a long time. I really didn't. I really struggled throughout my 30s. The first year after Adrienne died, I faked my way through it. I really did. I felt this ridiculous obligation to make sure other people knew I was okay, and I was not okay at all. And when that year anniversary happened, I really fell apart. And it was really tough. I mean, I had this very close group of friends that were there for my sister's cancer journey, that they are in my book. All their names have been changed, but they are in my book. They were very close to my sister. They weren't friends necessarily with each other, right? But they were friends with me and my partner at the time, who was the only father figure my sister ever had. And after I fell apart, um, most of them didn't know what to do or how to handle it, and I ended up losing all of those friends. So that's a whole another
oh,
level of
yeah.
loss and grief that I plan to write about in a future book that I'm kind of a third of the way through the first draft. But that was really hard. It's like
Mhm.
I bared my soul and showed you where I really was, and most of them walked away without ever telling me why.
Wow.
And so that was really, really tough. I don't think I answered your question at all, but
Yeah. So, well, so how did you handle that then? So how have you been able to, what have you been doing to help yourself heal?
initially a lot of distraction. I mean, a lot
Okay.
of distraction. I
Good.
worked like a freaking maniac around the clock. Um, then I also got the dog that I had always wanted. So I had always wanted an English Mastiff, and because of where I lived, an apartment or house that wouldn't allow it, and I got my English Mastiff about a year and a half after my sister died, and he was like the dog of my lifetime. He lived 10 and a half years. And, you know, at my lowest points, I could just go hug this 180-pound, actually, that was his skinny weight. His big weight was 200-pound dog. And he was always there for me. I think there's something very healing about animals, because dogs, especially cats, not so much, but dogs give you that unconditional love. Um, the other thing I did was I started 𝙬𝙤𝙪. I mean, it was never my life stream to start a nonprofit, but I wanted to channel my grief. I approached the largest liver disease organization in the US and offered to volunteer for them. And they wanted nothing at that time to do with liver cancer. They still actually don't do very much in liver cancer. And I did a lot of research, and there wasn't a single organization in the US doing anything in this disease. And I knew from my experience with my sister that the trajectory was just going to keep going up. I had no doubt in my mind.
Hmm.
And I was unfortunately right about that. So liver
Mhm.
cancer is one of the few cancers that is steadily on the rise in the US and around the world.
Hmm.
And so I started 𝙬𝙤𝙪, and that was, in a way, a distraction too, but it gave me a purpose. It gave
Mhm.
me something to kind of put under my feet again, and to move forward. It was definitely not always easy, but that helped a lot too. And then eventually I got into yoga. My sister was so ahead of her time. This kid was doing yoga in 2000 before yoga was cool. Like, she signed up for yoga classes in the summer and asked me to take her and pick her up. And I'm like, "You're doing yoga? Like, what?" And I didn't really get into yoga until 2010, I think. you know? So she was really into all that. So her tombstone reads "Young Spirit, Old Soul," and that
Mhm.
describes her perfectly.
Yeah, I love that. Um, what I like asking my questions, asking my guests this question, because especially we come from it with different categories and different topics. So, what's a commonly held belief about grief that you passionately disagree with?
Oh, ooh, gosh! And I did my homework on your podcast, and I don't remember this kind of question.
I don't do it every week, so.
Okay, darn. Let's see. I think that it'll go away.
Mm,
That'll go away.
yeah,
That you'll get over it.
right.
Um, and all the sort of inane, stupid things people say to you who have never experienced that level of grief. And and not to dismiss someone who's lost a husband, or what I mean, or spouse, but there's a big difference between losing your spouse who lived a very long life and losing your child who died at 15. There's just a huge difference in that level of loss. And yeah, the people who say just get over it. And then one of my friends that I met after my sister died, and we're still friends today, her sister died of cancer, and I think she put it so well. She said, it's kind of like your arm gets cut off, and
Mm,
your arm should be there, and you miss your arm, but you move through life knowing the arm's gone, but you never forget
mm,
and that
yeah.
you once had an arm. And I thought that was so spot on. And so grief isn't always 100% fully present, but
Mhm,
it's always there,
yeah.
and it's okay. Like, it's okay to grieve a loss. I think
Mhm,
one of the challenges I had early on was, like I said, that first year, I didn't grieve the loss. That first year, I just went through the motions and did everything to make everyone happy, showed up at every event. I mean, I went to a Halloween party 3 weeks after my sister died. That's ridiculous. But again, I was trying to make other people happy. And so if I can give anyone any advice, it's kind of to lean into the grief, because I wish I had sooner.
yeah. And it just occurs to me is that it's really almost you lost an arm and a leg
Yeah.
because you lost your sister and who became your adopted daughter.
Yeah.
So and I know when my brother died how hard it was for my mom. So in watching her, that yeah, it's the same thing. It's like you never get over it. You just learn to live with it. I
Yeah.
think
And
is
it's
really
unnatural. It's
yeah,
really, parents are not supposed to outlive their children.
right. Yeah. That's the theory, but it doesn't always work out that way.
Right.
So, um, what is what has been your maybe the biggest aha or maybe the best outcome that has come from starting the nonprofit?
Hmm. The hmm. The biggest, I don't know if it's aha, but I never knew how resourceful I really was. I had an inkling that, I mean, I'm persistent, resourceful, but we kept that nonprofit going when we had no money, and we started it from nothing. We started literally with $500 that paid the federal filing fee to become a nonprofit. Like, that's what we started with. And for 10 years, we sort of sputtered along and, kept going, but really had a tough time growing. I mean, I didn't even become a full-time employee until just a few years ago, and the nonprofit's over 20 years old. So I think maybe that is the biggest aha, is that I could just keep going. Every time I thought about giving up, and I did many times, I would get a call from a patient or a family member or an email, and somebody just needed someone to talk to and support. And I have a very funny story. This woman called me in 2008. Blue Fairy was only 5 years old again, but we were so small. I mean, patients found us, but we were still very small. And she called me, and she was very assertive, which I loved. And she said, "Are you going to be around in 10 years? I mean, for real, are you going to be around?" And I said, "Yes." Like, I didn't even hesitate. I didn't know how, but I just said yes. And she's like, "Good." Because I'm putting Blue Fairy in my will. And and she's a liver cancer survivor. And I just had the opportunity, at the time of this recording, 2 months ago, I got to meet her at a conference that happened to be in Honolulu, and she's in Hawaii. She's in Maui. And before this, I had never had the opportunity and it didn't make any sense. But she wanted to attend the conference and I needed to go. And I finally got to meet this woman in person after all these years. And we both laugh about the story now. Yeah. And so I think that it was such an honor to meet her.
That's awesome. And that just actually occurs to me is that we didn't really talk about what is the purpose of your foundation, or the nonprofit. What is it?
Yeah.
Who are you helping? What are you doing for folks?
Yeah, so 𝙬𝙤𝙪's mission is to prevent, treat, and cure primary liver cancer, specifically hepatocellular carcinoma, so HCC, through research, education, and advocacy. And we put patients and families first in everything we do, and we want to give them hope and information and also a voice. One of the biggest challenges with liver cancer is that it's not a cancer that most people survive. And so we don't have those survivors to be advocates for the disease. It often comes down to the family members. But we want to give patients that opportunity for a voice. And so we have a lot of different programs. We have a research award we give out every year on my sister's birthday. And then we also do a lot of education.
Well, one thing we haven't talked about is where the name came from.
I really wish I could take credit for the name, but I can't. So I knew I wanted my sister's name in it. So in memory of her, Adrienne Wilson. And I knew I wanted liver cancer in the name so people knew what we did. But I felt like from a marketing and branding perspective, something was sort of missing. And so I sent out an email to that small group of people, those 10 people. And I said exactly what I just said. Something's missing from a marketing perspective. I don't know what it is. Help me. And every person came back with some version of blue fairy because blue was my sister's favorite color. So much so that when I finally allowed her to dye her hair at the age of 14, she dyed it blue. And then like purple and red and then back to blue. And she loved fairies. And the summer she was sick fighting cancer, she bought these beautiful blue monarch butterfly wings that she would wear. And then she got a blue wig to maintain her look, she said. And we were calling her our blue fairy. And it was kind of one of those things where it kind of was like right in front of my face and I just couldn't see it. And we spell fairy with an E instead of an I because that was the spelling she preferred.
I love it. I love it. Oh, yes. I love the story and I love everything that you've been able to do. Is there anything else that I should have asked you about that we haven't touched on yet that you think would be important for our listeners and viewers to know about?
Well, you talk so much in your podcast about healing, and I would say that to people that there are multiple ways to heal. And the 20th anniversary of my sister's death in 2021, October of 2021, hit me just as hard as her death did. I mean, it just, I was devastated. And I was really struggling. I had already done a lot of therapy, especially when I was writing the first draft of my book. And I had already, I'd already done sort of the traditional route of therapy and antidepressants and things like that. And I really wanted to find other healing modalities. And it's kind of funny because I put it out there and it just showed up. The universe gave it to me. And this email was in my inbox about this conference online. And I recognized one of the speakers, but I didn't know he was in the space. Like I recognized him, as a book publisher. I'm like, what is he doing talking about, these healing modalities? Like what happened? And so I was super intrigued. And I watched it, and I think I even watched it live, which is pretty unusual for me. And I was like, okay, I think this is something I need to do. So starting in 2022, I started different healing modalities, and I prefaced this all with a guide, all with someone. So I have done about 6 sessions of MDMA, which is actually in phase 3 clinical trials right now for PTSD and depression. I've done ketamine, I think 4 times now. Ketamine is more accessible because it is completely legal. MDMA, you have to find a guide to do it unless you're in that clinical trial. I've done ayahuasca twice. I'll never do it again. I don't recommend starting with ayahuasca, but I'm grateful that I did it. And I've done a psilocybin once, which I did not
Oh,
like
wow.
at all. And I'm really glad I never did in college. Like I was like, magic mushrooms. I don't think so. Not my thing. But I really explored this stuff, and it was so out of character for me because my mother's an addict. And
Mm.
I was very scared to try any of these kinds of other healing modalities. But if you're doing it with a guide, again, this is not something I did in my bedroom alone,
Yeah.
and under the supervision, of a doctor or medical professionals, it can be incredibly healing. And it was exactly what I needed. It really was.
Mm. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And that, I think, is the big takeaway here, is that you have to, I think, number one, you've got to figure out what's going to work best for you. And that may require you trying a few different things,
Yes,
because sometimes things will work for a little while, but then maybe something else will come up and then it doesn't work anymore. And so then you need to
exactly.
find something else. I mean, like I've done about, I don't know, 4 or 5 different types of meditation, because I'll sail along for a while and then it's like, this isn't really doing it for me anymore. I need to figure out something else. And so, yeah, I think that's, I'm glad that you tried some different things, but yes, definitely make sure that you're working with a medical professional, because yeah, that's, you're, you're fooling around with how your brain functions. And so you need
Yes.
to be,
Yes, you need to have someone there. I think the
yeah.
other thing I did was I left Los Angeles.
Mm,
I really had wanted to leave Los Angeles for several years, but I was still married at the time. And and I was like, I need to change. I came home one day and I realized if I'd had a gun in my glove box, I would have shot the person in traffic. And so I was like, okay, it's time. It's
yeah.
time. And I sat down with my then husband and said, I need to change my environment. It's like the single biggest thing I can do for my mental health right now. And it's funny because people got really hung up on me moving to Birmingham, Alabama, even though I'm from the Southeast. But what I always say is, like, it wasn't about moving to Birmingham. It was about leaving Los Angeles. It truly, not to sound cheesy, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey. Someone told me, or several people told me, that you're doing better on your healing journey and your grief when after crying you feel better. That
Mm,
never happened for me until I drove across the country and I moved from Los Angeles to Birmingham. And something happened and I did it over 4 days because of my cat, but something happened between in East Texas. I don't know what had happened, but something happened, and I cried harder than I've ever cried in my life,
mm.
continuously for hours. Like, and I
Wow.
remember pulling over in multiple gas stations and just taking like 50 napkins, like, and looking like a hot mess. And it was the first time that after crying, I felt better. And by the
Mm,
time I pulled into Shreveport, I was like, oh my God, I don't know how that dam burst open in East Texas. Maybe because there's nothing to look at. I don't know. No offense to Texans, but it was exactly what I needed. But it took that long for it to happen.
yeah. Well, I think, and again, so this is, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just going from intuition. I think there was still something about that environment that you were still, like you said, you didn't allow yourself to grieve that first year. I think you were still, part of you was still holding on to it because you were in that, you were still in that environment.
Yeah.
That's where you raised her, you loved her, you lost her,
Yep.
and part of you, soon as you could free yourself from that space, that energy was what allowed you to release. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's that's amazing. I'm so glad you were able to do that. Yeah,
Yeah, me too.
so
And I
good.
still go back to LA every year, because
Mhm.
she is buried there,
Yeah,
and I visit her grave every year. But yeah, 5 days max. I'm like, I'm out. I'm done, LA. I'm done. Like, I mean, one time I
yeah,
was visiting and I went 3 miles in 90 minutes, and I'm like, yep, nope, nope. This is not my life anymore. I can't do it.
Oh,
So your
awesome.
environment's really important.
It
I
is,
think
yeah.
that's, your external where you actually live, but also, of course, your home and internal.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Oh, this has been wonderful. I've so enjoyed reconnecting with you
Me
today and
too.
having you share your story with my audience. So if someone wants to learn more about Blue Fairy, what's the best place for them to do that?
Just go to bluefairy.org, BLUEFAERY.org, and you can find us there and contact me as well.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure to see you again. And yeah, just I look forward to seeing that next book too, because that might have to have you back on the show to talk about that, because that could be an interesting journey and not a pleasant one when you lose friends like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
yeah.
you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And I do want to thank all of you for watching today, and for, if you're watching on social media or on YouTube, and thank you for listening as well. And if you have been enjoying the show and would like to continue to show your support and share your support. Yeah, well, yeah, I can tell a friend about it as well. We have been nominated for a Women in Podcasting Award in the Mindset category, and voting, we still have a couple weeks left as we're recording this in September. The voting goes through now and October 1st, 2024. So I will have the information in the show notes, but just to let you know, you can go to womeninpodcasting.net/awards, and you'll be able to look for Live, Love, Engage, and Mindset category and vote first. And I would greatly appreciate that. And that's going to do it for this edition. So until next time, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.